Welcome back to the Naval News. We're going to continue to update the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group today in her journey across the Pacific. She's finally made it into her mission area in the South China Sea, and she'll be operating in that theater for the next few months. At the same time that operation or that deployment is going on, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin are both meeting and improving relations with Japan and South Korea. And this is really important because something we learned recently, or I did, through the war games that were made public last month, is that we don't stand a chance in a peer conflict with China if we can't operate out of the air bases of both Korea and Japan. If we just had Okinawa and Guam, we would be fighting, from a very difficult position. It's those sorties that come from those land bases that really give us a shot at protecting Taiwan if it should come to that. So they're over there doing some crucial work, improving relations with them, and thankfully it seems to be working. Both Japan and Korea are really on board with this community defense of this region, pushing back against the expansionism that we're seeing coming out of China right now. Now let's shift gears a little bit here at home. This is Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mike Gilday. He's in charge of the entire U.S. Navy on the military side. As far as military chain of command goes, he's top dog. A lot of responsibility, an enormous amount of pressure to perform. And in the past, we've had, on this channel, we don't always agree with what he does, but his intentions are good, and I believe that he's doing the best that he can with what he has. So why is he in the news this week? Well, he has called onto the carpet all the shipbuilding corporations. We have 7 major shipyards here in the United States, and they simply are not performing despite being flooded with additional billions of dollars every year from Congress. So for example, in 2023's budget, which has already been approved and is enacted now, he requested $27 billion for shipbuilding purposes. Congress looked at the shipbuilding plan that the United States Navy had presented them and authorized an additional $5 billion, bringing it up to approximately $32 billion for this year alone to build more ships. And what we're getting and what we're ordering are vastly different. In other words, we're supposed to get 3 Arleigh Burkes per year under this new budget, and we're not getting that. We haven't been getting that, and we're struggling to get 2 Arleigh Burkes a year, which I believe they are managing to do. But more importantly, and a little bit surprising to me because I thought that this was a closed deal, we should be getting 2 Virginia-class submarines a year, and apparently we are not. Yeah, and that has been, that's not a new change. We should have been getting 2 Virginia-class a year for years now. And it turns out we're getting an average of 1.2, just over 1 completed submarine a year by our shipyards. And I'm specifically thinking of Electric Boat, even though the construction of Virginia is done and by more than one shipyard there. But they're simply not performing, they're not producing, despite getting additional funds and receiving additional orders from the United States. They aren't able to bring that up. And there's a world of reasons for this, including things like, supply chain issues. A critical shortage in skilled workers is really hurting us. We've been promoting or pushing our kids into college, which is great, but we're now seeing how that affects us long-term because we don't have the skilled workers at the deck plate level to construct these amazing machines. And a big part of this is Electric Boat's ability or liability for any submarine that they build that's capable of shooting a Tomahawk missile. And I'm not sure why that's a specific thing. But up until 2018, if there was an accident during construction or sea trials before the Navy accepted the submarine, the Navy covered the liability of the loss of the submarine, restitution to the families for the crew, and civilians as well, because these are built in civilian shipyards. So in 2018, the Navy said, listen, we're not taking on that liability anymore. Fund your own insurance program or find an insurance company to cover your liability. And since 2018, Electric Boat has not been able to do that. And that has severely limited the number of Virginias that they're producing right now. It's not the only reason, but it's a big one. And there are 2 Virginia classes right now that are over 11 months late, almost a complete year now. And we're only building 2 a year, right? It's supposed to be, we're not even doing that. But they're, because of this insurance liability problem over constructing and compensating sailors and families if something goes terribly wrong, they're simply not building 2 Virginia-class submarines, or they're not complete yet. So that is a big legal issue that doesn't appear to be being resolved anytime soon. And it's really holding up production of what I would argue is our most capable arm in the United States Navy, but I'm a little bit biased there. But I also happen to know that it's true. So hopefully we can get this resolved. Maybe the Navy goes back to covering the liability, or, and I know this is not a popular opinion, but maybe we consider nationalizing our 7 shipyards that build our warships so that it's all inside the house of the government. And so the liability is taken care of there. And that would be the same as having the U.S. take on the liability again, to be honest with you. But that's one big thing that's holding up the delivery of 2 Virginia-class submarines right now, is this liability for an accident that happens with submarines that can shoot the Tomahawk missile. And that needs to be resolved. And it's not really being reported much anywhere except the Naval Institute's website, and occasionally on navalnews.com, I think, has a story on it as well. But now you see it here. We really need to motivate these shipyard companies to finish these submarines and get them to the fleet. We're paying for them. We're just not getting them. And 1.2 a year is not going to be enough. And we're paying for 3 Arleigh Burkes this year. We had better see some production on those as well. All right, I think I've beat that enough. Let's go back to 2021. Some new information came out about this huge war game. We do these, I think it's every other year, but this basically a global war game with the United States Navy and Marine Corps, and we electronically connect the fleets across the globe. And that's all very sensitive, so we're not going to talk about the details of that. But what they do is insert targets, and they can pretend they're at war globally and then do some lessons learned and get some experience doing that. And that's the end of that topic. But what we're doing now, the new information is they're going to start training individual ships the same way with the schoolhouses in Norfolk. I believe San Diego has a big one too. And they can, give the ship at the shore base level, so the captain's not even running the drill anymore, which I'm sure is not going to go over well with a lot of captains. They can insert targets into the ship as a training exercise, of course, and then have them perform the drill from shore-based trainers and instructors. And while the training happens at sea, and everybody on board the ship can enjoy the simulation as if it's real. And the purpose of this, the whole reason why we're bringing this up is this admiral right here. This is Vice Admiral Roy Kitchener. He's the surface commander of the Pacific Fleet right now, and his goal is to maintain 75 warships that are mission capable at all times. And I was a little bit floored that we don't already have that. But whenever you think about the rotation of a ship through maintenance, training, and deployment, of course, not all the ships in the Navy are available at once. But apparently, as far as mission-capable combatants go, that do not include submarines and do not include, of course, the fast support ships or even the aircraft carriers. We're talking about cruisers, littoral combat ships, the Arleigh Burke destroyers, ships in that category. We don't even have 75 ready at once. The total number of ships in this group right now is only 164 ships. So I want you to think about that. Yeah, we say we have a 300-ship Navy. Only 164 of them are even capable of fighting. The rest are support or aircraft carriers, which is a big fighting capability. And then, of course, submarines, which we simply do not talk about here because of the sensitivity of that issue. So this this live virtual and constructive training is happening, or plans to be happening, to be pushing towards these destroyers so they can train and operate under the same curriculum, very similar to Common Core, where all the students in the United States are held to the same minimum standard. All the destroyers and ships in that group that I told you about, including littoral combat ships, will be trained to a baseline minimum. This allows a lot of flexibility in deployment, because whenever we get engaged, if there isn't a conflict in the future and we begin losing vessels, we want to be able to take a vessel that is fully trained, mission capable, but in port, and replace it into the fleet that just lost that ship. And so that's the goal here. It adds flexibility to the plan, because we no longer live in a world where we're not going to take losses in a war. And the Admiral wisely recognizes this and is making a change. Now, this baseline training from an enlisted level, if I can just put this out there, like all sonarmen, we get like the same baseline training, and then we have different specialities that we end up getting into. I love seeing that idea that works so well, where you can plug and play sonarmen into different ships. We can now do that at the fleet level by plugging in different destroyers to compensate for losses and loss of capability due to weapon damage. And this is happening now. He's trying to push this program this year. The goal is we want 75 ships mission ready at all times. Now, there's a couple categories that he talks about. We have fully mission ready, and those are typically the ships that are going to sea or already on deployment right now, like the Nimitz carrier group. Those are fully mission capable. Then we have this, what I believe is a new category called mission capable, and then we have non-mission capable. Non-mission capable are all the ships that have come back from deployment recently and are in a extended maintenance period, which is common for every ship, has to go through them, a training period, of course, which can last months, and then they have to load stores and so forth, arms, weapons, and at that point, the non-mission capable would become mission capable, and then with mission or deployment readiness or preparedness training, say off the coast of California for a month or two, they become fully mission capable and are deployed. So those are the new three categories. Fully mission capable and non-mission capable are not new, but this category that he's referring to as mission capable is new to me, and he did not strictly define the difference between mission capable and fully mission capable. If there's more clarity on that, and as this program comes online and there's more public information about it, I'll clear that up for you. But it's good to see that we have a senior, admiral that's in charge of the Pacific Fleet who's expecting to take losses and preparing to, plug new ships into fleets if that should occur. It seems like we're making some good decisions at the top, and I support that 100%. Let's shift a little bit towards other nations. We've been following this Iranian flotilla, I'll call it. It's just two ships working together, sailing the globe. This is the first time Iran has put warships on a voyage around the globe, a Magellan-style trip around the globe, except they're using the Panama Canal, which Magellan didn't have in 1519 whenever he took his trip. Anyway, so the first ship here is the Crack. That's the converted oil tanker. It's a support ship with a helo deck and can carry all sorts of, food, fuel, munitions. Don't laugh or scoff at this. The United States did the same thing. We have like 6 of these, and they operate all around the Middle East and in Africa. I think one might actually be in the Pacific, but who knows. But here we put down on the little Google Earth for you the rough positions of where they were in September. They took this route. On Christmas Day, they were near French Peloponnesia. They actually got a little greeting from that maritime patrol aircraft over there and made sure everything was cool. And now they're on this long and what I would consider the most hazardous part of the journey, where they're going through the South Pacific towards Panama. There is no land for thousands of miles around this area. So if anything goes wrong, it's going to be a long time before help gets to them. So as a sailor, I respect this. This is a big voyage. Granted, it's in the modern era, and as long as their equipment is running and properly maintained, they should have no problems navigating to and through the Panama Canal and then back home again. So as they go through the Panama Canal and into the Atlantic Fleet, we'll update this again, but just know that Iran is doing this trans-globe trip, which is kind of interesting. And we'll see if they make it. Maybe they will. All right. And then finally, this is just, I want to give a lot of credit here. This channel's been on for, I think we're going on 6 years now. And over those years, we've made changes in format. And right now we're more naval news and technology. So I want to give, a big tip of the hat to the U.S. Naval Institute. It's a organization that I'm a member of, and I use them all the time for information like what I brought to you today and their graphics. So I'd encourage everybody, if you want to know what I'm going to talk about next, check out usni.org and go to the news section, and that's where I pick a lot of the interesting stories there. Also, big credit to Xavier Vassiver, who runs navalnews.com, and even though I call this series Naval News because that's what we talk about, I'm not affiliated with them at all, so any mistakes I make, do not put them on them, okay? That on them. Xavier does a great job, navalnews.com. Now, he's more European-centric, even though he does branch out from that, but it's great to bring the European perspective and programs that are happening over there into the stories we have today. And of course, H.I. Sutton, the gentleman there you see on the far right, outstanding website called covertshores.com, and he's very active on Twitter. He is a true naval analyst. He is the person that I would love to be. I just don't have the resources or the knowledge that that man has. He is fantastic. So I would encourage everybody to follow him on Twitter and check out his website. And finally, I would be very wrong if I did not mention Tyler Rogaway from the Warzone, who has they publish articles every day over there that are very interesting. They cover much more than the Navy. It's the Warzone. They do all branches, but they do a lot of work. And they just recently published a work by a good friend of mine, Saturn X on Twitter, wrote a story for them that I think you'll find very interesting. I'm going to put links to all these websites down in the description, so please check them out. It's where I get my information. I go to these websites first, and then I see what else I can find out there in the OSINT community. So tip of the hat to all these guys. I couldn't do what I do without them, so big credit to all them. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great one.